Welcome, welcome. You guys ready to roll here? All right, today we dive into Take the Lead once again. We're looking at the book of Mark as our template, kind of our springboard for the conversation each week and the message. This week we're talking about conflict. I thought it might be fun just to cause some conflict in the room right off the bat. I thought about it. I decided not to. There's really actually some very easy ways. You just like Packers versus Bears. Go. And immediately there's like this tension in the room that just rises to the surface, and I just think that's a little comical, but it is reality, is that we get passionate about things and then conflict arises, and if we think that even for a moment we can go by probably in a week without having some level of conflict, you're probably fooling yourself. You will run into and encounter conflict almost on a weekly basis. I see it in my house with obviously 9 kids that there's arguments that rise up between siblings every single week, and I, as a parent, have the opportunity to lead them through that conflict and to kind of maneuver those waters. And it's not always fun, but it is necessary, and it's something that we have to learn how to lead others through as well as lead ourselves through in a good way. And we don't always get it right, but we can at least try to learn some of the best principles from our master, Jesus, and see how he does it, and then try our best to apply those in our own lives. So we're in Mark. Mark chapter 9 is where we're going to be, and we're just going to read this passage and then unpack it a little bit and talk it through, okay? Mark chapter 9, verse 33. This is Jesus and the disciples, they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, that's Jesus, he asked them, the disciples, what were you arguing about on the road? So they're having a fight. They're having a conflict, okay? But they kept quiet because on the way, they had argued about who was the greatest. Awesome. The disciples are fighting about who's the best. Sitting down, Jesus called the 12 and said, if anyone wants to be first, he must be the very last and the servant of all. He took a little child and had him stand among them. Then taking the child in his arms, he said to them, whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but the one who sent me. And he's referring obviously to the Father. So here you've got the disciples, and they're having a fight. They're arguing about who's the greatest. We're going to get to that kind of element of why they might be fighting about who's the greatest in just a little bit. But they're arguing, and Jesus is going to set an example for us concerning how he maneuvers this situation, how he walks the disciples through this conflict. And I think there's some good insights that we can pick up, because all of us are going to deal with conflict. You might be in one right now, and if there's someone to learn from in terms of some good principles around conflict resolution, it would be Jesus. And I think he gives us some great little cues that we can learn from. And so I just want to give you 3. Not every message has 3 wonderful points, but Jesus does model some things here, and I observe 3 things I just want to share with us. I think if we just kind of hold on to these nuggets, we can learn something great in terms of conflict resolution. The first one is this: address the conflict quickly and directly. Let's just go to Mark chapter 9 once again and see how Jesus addresses the conflict quickly and directly. All right, so they're on their way to Capernaum, and when he makes it to the house, he asked them, what were you arguing about on the road? So what we see Jesus do here is he said, all right, they're traveling to a city, and earlier in the day, they're having an argument, and now we see Jesus address the conflict quickly. It happened earlier in the day. Now it's evening. He's going to talk about it, and then he addresses it directly. Hey, guys, let's talk about the fight, shall we? He goes straight for it to say, let's discuss what was happening there. And I think in terms of these 2 elements of quickly and directly, we can learn something from each of these. When we think about quickly, think about maybe how you engage with conflict. Now, if I were to ask, hey, show of hands, who loves conflict? Probably no hands would go up. Because if we're honest, none of us like conflict. No one's like sprinting into conflict saying, yes, I want to do that. Now, there are different ways in which when we face conflict, we have natural kind of reactions. Sometimes we think about fight or flight. Like if you're going to be in a conflict, some of you are like, I'm going in guns blazing. You know, you're the fight mentality. I'm going in to win this war. Others of you might head in going, listen, if a conflict arises, I'm the one who's flying away. I've got the flight mentality. I'm trying to leave. I don't want anything to do with it. For others of you, maybe it was the family system you grew up in that you learned the sweep it under the rug approach, which isn't really fight or flight, it's ignore. We just ignore it and pretend it didn't happen, just kind of sweep it under the rug. Most of us, we don't like conflict, but here's the deal. Not addressing conflict always creates a much larger conflict. Not addressing conflict always creates a much larger conflict. And so we need to learn to address it quickly, and we need to do it for other people's sake as well as for ours. And let me just unpack the why for ours. Look at what Ephesians chapter 4, verse 26 and 27 says. It says, in your anger, do not sin. Meaning, are you ready for this? You can be angry and that not be a sin, okay? But you can also be angry and enter into sin. So it's how we handle frustration and anger that matters. If you feel like, man, I've become angry, I'm sinning, that's not true. It's I become angry, now don't sin in that. Okay? So in your anger, don't sin. How will we not sin? Well, do not let the sun go down while you're still angry. So the Apostle Paul is addressing time. Time is related to how quickly we deal with conflict and our anger that really matters. And so he's saying, don't allow the sun go down. Deal with it quickly. And do not give the devil a foothold. So when Paul says, don't give the devil a foothold, the Greek word there actually can be translated as space. So it's don't give the devil time and space in your life, in your anger. So what you do is if we give the devil time to operate in our anger, in our lives, it's like you're saying, hey, there's this little spot in my heart. It's not a lot. It's just a little space. But I'm giving you the rights to live in that space in my life, in my mind, in my heart, for just a short period, or for a period of time to create conjecture, imagine the worst, get more frustrated, and that's what you're allowing the enemy to do. So when I say deal with it quickly for their sake and for yours, the reason why you want to deal with it for your sake is you don't want to give the devil a foothold in your life. You don't want to give the devil a foothold, space in your mind and in your heart around the situation. Are you tracking? All right, good. If I were to write an equation, it might look like this. Conflict plus time equals bitterness, anger, rage, malice, conjecture, confusion, a big mess, folks. Conflict plus time makes all those things. While conflict dealt with quickly, short period of time, limits all those things. You're not giving the enemy space to rule in your hearts and your minds during that time period. I remember at my last church, there was a staff member who he was having conflict with some of the leaders of the church. And they just differed on how things should be done and the approach of different things. And here's the deal, is they kind of beat around the bush. Have you ever had a conversation that just beats around the bush? Kind of talking about it, but not really ever addressing what it is. And they just beat around the bush. They never really address it. They didn't address it quickly for sure. Time went by, and what happened is just over time, the frustration, the anger mounted up. And then one day it all came out, and it just kind of spewed out. Everything hit the fan, and a few months later, that staff member was gone. And I really believe a lot of the why is because the people involved allowed the devil to have a foothold in their anger around the conflict. And so we've got to deal with it quickly. The other part of it is deal with it directly. That just means you call a spade a spade. You call it out exactly what it is. Let me just put it into a couple different contexts, and you'll probably be able to say, yeah, that's really important that we just deal with things directly. Think about it in maybe a relationship setting like a marriage. You and I probably know a lot of marriages that suffer because couples don't talk about their conflict directly. It usually starts with small things, right? Always starts with a small thing that it seems so small, it's not worth bringing up. Like you look at the person you're married to and you're like, oh, I love them so much. It's just a small thing. And those small things, when not directly dealt with, over time add up to lots of things that feel like a massive, irreconcilable mountain of issues because they started with just small things that were not directly called out. Like this thing, let's just deal with it. It's small, but if we deal with it directly, we'll be able to find resolution to it. Reconciliation, healing, perhaps. Maybe in a work setting. Probably you've all experienced this. If you've worked in any type of setting, maybe you can at least imagine it. Two staff members or two employees that are fighting. They just happen to be at war with one another. And their conflict brings tension into the entire office. And everyone's now walking around on eggshells because of two. Ever been there? Ever experienced something like that? Maybe even in a family setting, two family members are fighting, but their tension causes tension in the entire household. Now, everyone's walking around with tension because of those two. What a good leader would do in a work setting like that is they would call out the two employees, and they would say, you two have got to work out your stuff because it's unfair to what it's doing to all of us. And so it's about being direct. In a family setting, maybe you've had two children or two people in your family that, once again, they're the ones that are just at each other's throats. We've been there, and one of the things that you just do is you call a spade a spade. You two cannot be doing this. You can't act this way. We're going to help you guys come to a conflict resolution for the sake of all of us here. And just being willing to call it out directly. So deal with it quickly, deal with it directly. Second thing that Jesus does is he approaches the conflict with questions, not answers. He approaches the conflict with questions, not answers. And let's check it out in Mark chapter 9, how he does this with questions. Once again, same verse that we looked at before, verse 33, it says this. When he was in the house, we don't have can you get the verses up there? Heidi. Okay, there we go. Yeah, next one. Verse 33. He asked them, what were you arguing about on the road? Right? He asks them a question. Now this is fascinating. It's Jesus, right? He's God. He could have just simply, he could have simply said, hey guys, I know what you were talking about. Peter, knock it off. You know, he could have just called out the guys right there and said, listen, this is how I see the situation. This is what you did that was right. This is what you did that was wrong. Come on, guys, knock it off. But he doesn't approach it with a statement. He approaches it with a question. Now, here's two important reasons why I think questions are critically important. Questions offer people the ability, or actually they force people to own their own actions as well as process their actions. To own your own actions and to process your actions. And here's why those two things are so important. First one, owning your own actions. Until someone owns their own actions, for like, let's say it's in my family and my kids, until my kids own their own action of wrong, I can't bring discipline, correction, insight, or instruction into the situation. They need to own their own actions. Let's just, I got my children here. I shouldn't bring any of them up. That would be bad. Okay, I'll give you a hypothetical, okay? A hypothetical situation. Let's imagine the two of my kids, one of them comes to me and they're like, so-and-so is teasing me. Okay, so now here's what I could do. I could approach it with a statement. Hey, bring the kid who was teasing me, knock it off, stop teasing them. Now, if I start with a statement, it always produces the same result. It always produces this. I didn't. Always I didn't. It always goes into denial or defensive mechanism. And if you've ever been in a conflict and you started with a statement, you immediately put the person in that you're having the conflict with into defense mechanism or into the denial perspective. And so what you want to do is you start with a question as opposed to a statement. And as soon as you ask the question, hey, tell me, let's say the kid who was teasing, tell me what happened. And they start to talk about the situation. They start to tell you, here's what happened. Then eventually what they're going to do is I'll say, okay, sounds like teasing. Was that teasing? And they'll go, yeah. Now they've owned their action. As soon as they've owned their action, now I can actually bring direction, correction, accountability to the situation. Second reason is that you want to help them own the action and then own the process of their action. So then the follow-up statement is, why'd you tease them? And they might say, well, so-and-so was like up in my grill. They were up in my face. They just wouldn't leave me alone. I got so frustrated with them that I teased them. Okay, so you got so frustrated because they were touching you, they were up in your face, they wouldn't leave you alone, that you took it out in an inappropriate way by teasing them in front of everyone else. Yes. Okay, so those are the wrong processes. What should you have done? Well, when they're up in my face, I should have asked them to stop. And then if that didn't work, then I should have gotten a parent. Right. Okay, so now, because they're owning their process, they're actually able to change and create new habits. Which if you're working with an employee who's doing the wrong thing over and over and again, you want to create new habits in their life. And the only way you're going to do that is asking questions that will get them to own their action and own the process to their action. So now go back to Jesus and the disciples. When Jesus asks them, what are you guys talking about? The reason they don't answer is they're embarrassed. They're like, hey, I don't want to talk about what we were doing, because then they're going to have to own their action and process what they were talking about with Jesus. And here's another element of questions. Questions actually infer, are you ready for this? Listening. They infer that you are going to listen. And in conflict, listening is so important. It reminds me of James chapter 1, verse 19. It says this, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to what? Slow to what? And slow to become. Okay, so here's the deal. If we're quick to listen, it means you're asking a question so that you can listen to the response. In doing so, we're basically saying, I'm going to hold my tongue, I'm going to be slow to speak, and in so, I'm actually going to become slow to become angry. So my anger is actually connected to my quickness to listen and my slowness to speak. So when I'm in a conflict, instead of saying, I got something to say here, which is the quick to speak, if you go in and say, I've got something to find out and learn, I've got something I need to hear and listen, you'll actually slow down your anger. From a practical perspective, questions are powerful. If you approach a conflict with questions, you're actually usually disarming the situation. You're giving people voice into what happened. You're validating their perspective. And in your listening, you're also earning the right to speak into the situation. And here's probably the biggest thing. Questions will reveal, are you ready for this? Somebody's heart on the other side. You'll actually discover, oh, the person I'm having a conflict with, they have a heart. They have a perspective. They have emotions. They have something that led them here, and I need to discover what's their heart below this. I know at my last church, there was a guy who he and I just seemed to be like we saw opposite on everything. If I said, here's what I think we're going to do for the ministry, he said, I don't think that's right. I think you should go about it this way. And if I said, here's the direction we're heading, he would say, I think you should head this direction. I think that's all wrong where you're going. He and I just seemed to be opposite on everything. And so he was a leader in the church, and I thought, man, we're just going to keep knocking heads forever. And so I said, let's go on out for lunch. And so I took him out for lunch, and I said, tell me your story. Tell me, where'd you grow up? What's your background? When did you come into a relationship with Jesus? He just kind of told me his whole story, and vice versa. I shared mine with him. And at the end of it, guess what I discovered after asking lots of questions? I discovered that he and I actually had the exact same vision. We both wanted to see people come to know Jesus, and we both wanted to see people grow in their walk with him. We just had opposite roads in which we believed would get us to that same destination. But here's what I realized is that while I said I believe that this road will get us to that destination, he's saying I believe this road will get us to that destination, understanding that he and I shared the value of the exact same destination and understanding his heart. You want to know what happened in mine? My anger toward him diminished. It went away. Because I discovered a heart on the other side of all those questions, and I realized he's going the same place I'm going. We just happen to have different perspectives of how to get there. But I was able to approach it totally different because questions reveal people's hearts. Final and third kind of observation here with Jesus is remind our hearts to recalibrate around servanthood. Remind our hearts to recalibrate around servanthood. Let's check this out in verse 35. So sitting down, Jesus calls the 12 to himself, and he says, anyone who wants to be the first must be the very last and servant of all. And then he takes a little child and he placed him right among them. And then he takes the little child in his arms and he said to them, whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. Whoever welcomes me does not only welcome me, but the one who sent me. Okay, so what's the deal here? What's the deal with the kid that Jesus brings into the middle here? Well, picture it like this. Have you ever known anyone who name drops? Name dropping, where you're people who are dropping people's names of who are influential in culture or in society or popular in society, and they do it all for the sake of elevating themselves, making themselves look better. Well, as silly as that sounds, that's actually exactly what was happening in Jesus' day all the time. People were regularly name dropping. They were regularly wanting to be seen with some of the most important people in culture, which in that day and age would have been the rabbis, would have been the Pharisees, would have been the Sadducees, it would have been the teachers of the law, it would have been the scribes. Those are the people who had been ranked high, and everyone wanted to be with those people. And in fact, if you went into any situation, any setting, people would almost immediately kind of rank themselves around the room. They would walk into a room and say, where am I in the ranking? They'd say, all right, the most important person is that person. Then from there, it's this person, then that person, then that person, depending on their job, what they did, their family line, things like that. And while you're like, man, that seems crazy. No, it would even take it one step further. If you went to a banquet or you went to a wedding, you want to know how the seating arrangement would be set up? It would be the host, then it would be the second most important person or the most important person right next to the host, the guest of honor, and then everyone in the room would be sat in order of importance all the way around the room until the farthest table, farthest away from the host, would be the least important person. So when we think about the disciples and they're arguing about who's the greatest, as easy it is to be like, what's up with these prideful jerks? Be like, what's wrong with these guys? It's actually probably a pretty practical conversation for them. They're probably going, hey, listen, do they ever go to banquets? Do they ever go to people's houses where there's a host and then Jesus? And I can imagine the disciples are like, who's next in the seating arrangement? We just want to figure it out. I just want to know who's next in the lineup. And so for them, it's a very culturally normal thing to just go, I just want to know what the seating arrangement is. And they're having an argument of, I think I should be closer. Like maybe they just had come out of someone's house. And they're like, I don't like where I got sat. I want to be up higher, and I'm going to make my argument of why I should be closer to Jesus. You know, that type of thing. In fact, when James and John's mother comes to Jesus and asks him, in the kingdom of God someday, can my sons be seated on your right and your left hand? In her cultural perspective, that's a very logical question. She's asking, hey, can they be next in line of importance? That's what was of highest value in their culture. So at the very end of the line of the lineup of who's important in culture, you want to know who's at the very end? Children. See, children were seen and not heard. They had no actual structural, or they had no value yet in culture. They were at the very end of the line. No one was concerned about what their opinion was about anything or any of that. And so when Jesus takes a child and says, hey, he puts him in the middle and he says, hey, embrace this child. Hang out with this child. Welcome this child. Be acquainted with this child. What he's saying is, hey guys, you want to know what the perspective needs to be? It needs to be the lowest of the low. It needs to be a servant perspective that says, I'm going to put everyone in front of me. And so when it comes to conflict, if we can get ourselves and those that we're involved with, or that we're involved with the conflict with, to put on the lens of servanthood and place everyone in front of me, then we actually start to see the perspective, the conflict very differently. Here's a simple question. For some of you, you might say, you know what, I'm in a marketplace, work environment. I can't just walk into a conflict and say, hey guys, let's apply some biblical principles today around conflict. May not be able to do that. But you can ask a simple question. Are you ready for an easy question that you can say, ask this question and answer this question, and then come back to me once you have, okay? Here's the question. Really good. Listen. Worth writing down. Okay. What do you think, the person that you're in conflict with, what do you think they are thinking? What do you think they are processing? And what is it that you think they need from you? Now, really, that doesn't sound too biblical, but it's very biblical. Here's why those questions actually will produce something great in the person that you ask that question. What are they thinking? What are they processing? What do they need from you? First two questions actually get the person to take their eyes off of themselves and their perspective and put it onto the other person, which makes them selfless. It makes them start thinking about the other person's perspective, right? Second, or that final question, what do they need from you? What does that do? It actually helps them put on the lens of servanthood. So that first step is just get them to get their eyes off themselves. The second step is to get them to actually put their eyes onto how do I serve the other person, which is that lens of servanthood. And that's if they can say, what does the person need from me that I can actually serve them with, that helps them to shift to this place of servanthood in a conflict. And so that simple question that actually might be able to shift perspective in your workplace or in a conflict setting. I don't know what you're facing this week. I don't know the conflict that you might be in the middle of or that you might feel or the tension that you run into. But here are some real simple things that Jesus models from dealing with it quickly and directly, asking questions instead of bringing the answer, trying to get his disciples to reorient through the lens of servanthood that are so critical and simple for us to take. You know, when I think about conflict, sometimes I go back to a place in history that I just think it's a pity of what took place. It's the peace accords that took place in Paris during the Vietnam War. For 7 months, the peace accords could not start because the North Vietnamese and the South Vietnamese couldn't agree upon the shape of the conference table that they were going to meet around to discuss peace. And so for 7 months and 2 days, they argued until finally they came to the decision, and this is bizarre, they actually ended on 3 tables, 2 square tables with a circle one in the middle. I don't know how they agreed upon that, but they said that we will finally meet around. And that's when the peace accords finally began the discussion. Now here's why I think that's sad. So I wonder how many men died during that 7-month and 2-day period of time while they were figuring out what shaped table we should meet around. How many men died from May 10th to December 12th, 1968, while they were delaying talking about peace? See, conflict plus time literally cost men many lives. And maybe you guys can relate to that idea of conflict plus time sometimes produces an incredibly painful cost. Maybe some of you have experienced the pain, the wounding in the relationships, or the broken relationships, the ruined relationships. You've experienced the wounds, you've experienced alienation. I just want to say, folks, there's a better way. And we all can learn from what Jesus models. If we can just pick up some of these pieces and say, how can I apply this in my situation? We can probably start discovering a peaceful resolution on the other side. So let's pray, and then we'll be done. Would you stand with me, though? Let's stand up. Heavenly Father, I'm reminded as well that in the midst of conflicts, as we were singing earlier, our battle is not against flesh and blood. It's against the spiritual forces in the heavenly realms. And so we just pray that you would do a great work right now in the midst of the conflicts that some of us are facing, that you would break through in the spiritual realm and bring your peace, that you would bring your direction, that you would bring your healing, that you would bring restoration. Lord, for us in the practical side of things, I pray that we would lead others and ourselves well through times of conflict, that we would apply some of these principles of just dealing with things quickly and directly, asking questions instead of bringing an answer, that we would approach the situation with a servant's heart. How can we serve the other person? What do they need from us in this situation? Lord, I just pray that you would just do what you can accomplish. It's the miracle work you can accomplish in bringing restoration into broken things. So we pray all this in Jesus' name. And before you leave, I just want to highlight our prayer partners back here. If you're in the middle of what is a very difficult situation, I would highly encourage you, just take a journey back here to one of our prayer partners and just say, hey, this is what I'm dealing with. Would you pray specifically right now for breakthrough in this conflict that I'm facing? I would really appreciate it. They would love to partner with you. Otherwise, have a wonderful Sunday, and we'll see you next week in the park. Don't forget to come early, bring your stuff. We'll see you then.